In late June, early July, I started living in an apartment with my old smoking buddy, Matt. Matt ran a squat he called the Way Station. Nowadays, it was less than a squatters and more of Matt's buddies from his job at Burger King. It was still a pretty fun place to be, and we had house parties every night. About a week after I moved in, a couple of my buddies came over to watch the game. During the commercial, I went out for a smoke. While I was out on the porch, this punk-looking kid came up and sat down next to me. He introduced himself as Nate, and we talked for a few minutes. He told me that he was supposed to be moving into the squat. Matt never told me anything about this. Nate and I ended up getting along great. Don't get me wrong, Matt's a great guy and all, but you can't have any kind of meaningful conversation with him. Nate was the opposite. I mean, at parties he was awkward as fuck, but when two or three of us went to go talk for hours about anything and everything, Nat had come from South Boston to visit his girlfriend, who apparently lived on the block of the squat, though no one ever seen her before. I later found out that this was because she went to a local prep school and was like insane smart. We met on some dating site for people who love Star Wars and crime shows and all that geeky shit. He was always over at her place, and he didn't take up too much space there, so no one really noticed when he was gone. On the off chance that he was at the squat, he was discussing regarding politics, religion, drugs, anything under the sun. Eventually, during one of our religion convoys, I asked him if he believes in the paranormal. He replied that he did. For a little backstory, I've been going into haunted houses since as long as I can remember. I've always been into ghosts and demons and shit. We talked about this for a while before I decided to pop the question. So, has anything paranormal ever happened to you? Like, just anything weird that you can't explain? Nate looked at his feet. I have to go meet my girlfriend. I'll catch you later, bro. Even now, I regret that question. About 3 weeks later, Nate's girlfriend broke up with him for reasons I still don't quite understand. Apparently she was a lesbian or something. You'd have to ask him though. I didn't have the heart to. I came home for a smoke session and found him in the kitchen floor in a crumbled position next to an empty bottle of oxidant pills. He groggily raised up his head and I came into the room. Guess I didn't take enough. I kicked him in the stomach. Hard. Hard enough to make him vomit up with the remains of whatever was in there. I was livid, but at the same time, sympathetic. I've been that far down before, and it ain't fun. I gave him a pen and paper and told him to write down everything he wanted to accomplish in life, sort of like a bucket list. Told him no one would ever see it but him, and made him promise that he would stay alive until he had completed everything on that list. Nate hastily scribbled down a few notes, then put the paper in his pocket and stumbled into the living room, where he collapsed on the couch in a drug-induced stupor. As I sat in the chair next to him, I suddenly became aware of an intense curiosity. I had to know what he had written on the paper. I mean, I was fucking baked at the time, but at the same time, his cryptic answer to the paranormal question a few weeks back had been eating away at me. So I decided to give him a quick look, see if he had any clues. Just one look, then I'd put it back in his pocket. He'd never even know. Letting my curiosity get the better of me, I did just that. The paper read, "To the people who matter most. My brother, my mentor, and Jessie Mack." Okay, so it was just paranoia. It was a completely average bucket list, and I was already baked out of my mind. I slipped the note back into his pocket and turned on TV. Still, there was something that struck me as odd about that last one. Jessie Mack. Sounded familiar. Like something out of my childhood that I couldn't quite keep my finger on. I never told Matt what happened. Nate was still asleep when he got home from work. We watched a few movies, including this really strange one called Being John Malkovich, which was Matt's favorite for reasons I really don't understand. But halfway through the movie, I looked over at Matt. "Hey, remember Jessie Mack?" He started cracking up. The fucking kind of parents named their kid Jessie Mack. I smiled back. Some parents in Boston, I guess. Mac couldn't stop laughing. "I mean, are you fucking serious? Jessie Mack? Jessie fucking Mack. Hey, everyone, I'm Jessie Mack, and I'm from Dorchers." He was shouting in a Fox Boston accent now. It was pretty hilarious. At the same time, there was something slightly eerie about it, and I started feeling guilty about taking the note from Nate's pocket. Nate started to wake up sometime later. He was in a lot of pain, but he managed to grin at me while attempting to sit up. Matt was in the other part of the apartment, shouting at himself, which was actually pretty normal. A few hours later, we were all sitting together watching a South Park movie. We watched a lot of movies here. Every few minutes, Nate became a little spasm, but nowhere near as bad as he had been. Matt turned to him. "So about this Jessie Mack, I need to meet this person. She sounds so freaking hot." There's no way I could have predicted what was about to happen. In a fraction of a second, Nate jumped out of the couch, backed himself into a corner, whipped out his pocket knife, and pointed it straight at Matt. He was shaking all over. In a barely audible voice that sounded as if he was gasping for air, he mouthed, "Don't you fucking come near me. You have no idea what you're doing. No fucking clue. Don't ever fucking mention her name again." And with that, Nate vomited all over the carpet and passed out on the floor again. What happened after that was pretty much a blur. I was trying to find a job at the time, so I didn't get to spend as much time in the house. Nate became extremely paranoid, especially around Matt. He would hole up in his room with a terrified expression on his face, pointing this little BB pistol he had at everything that moved. And knowing Nate, this was odd. Nate was about as big as a bear, with facial hair that matched an usually laid-back disposition after all that went down. Matt, on the other hand, was manic at the time. He'd run around the kitchen screaming, "My name is Jessie Mack," at the top of his lungs in an obnoxious fake Boston accent, though it was clearly making Nate's condition worse. At one point, I woke up in the night and heard part of a conversation between Nate and this ex on our porch. He was begging her to stay with him or something. When she refused, his tone turned from sadness to terror. A terror of no one who has seen too much. She left, telling him he was talking like a crazy person. Matt kept having strange people over, whom I've never seen before. Eventually, whenever someone I didn't know came over, Matt and I would go and walk down the avenue until they left. I never heard much about what they talked about, but in several different times I heard a few people in the living room mutter, "Jessie fucking Mack? Holy shit," or something like that. This was clearly upsetting to Nate, and every time he heard the same name he'd referred in his paranoid, vomiting state. In late August, he decided to leave here for good. He was so sick he could barely stand up, and I ended up carrying him most of the luggage to the bus station with him. On our way, everyone was just staring at us. I mean, I don't blame them. You don't see too many puking teenagers carrying suitcases through some bum-fucking town in New Jersey. As we passed the railroad bridge, a man in his truck threw some kind of gang-signed group of kids in their early 20s. As he drove, he shouted, "Jessie fucking Mack!" Everyone in the group started pumping their fists in the air. Nate emptied his stomach on the ground next to the bridge. He kept running into gangs on our way to the bus station, almost like they knew we'd be out today. Gangs that had been fighting each other for decades, standing out in the open, chest bumping, fist bumping, as if they were unifying against some unseen force. All shouting, "Jessie Mack." By the time we got to the bus station, Nate was in real bad shape. I hugged him goodbye and told him to go find a new place to live. One in which no one would knew anything about him or Jessie Mack. He smiled back at me, then managed to laugh funny, and he said, "That's exactly what they told me back in Boston." That was the last time I saw him before October. After I moved back with my dad, this little town about an hour from Matt's apartment, I got a real job, bought a junk car, the whole works. I even started dating this girl I really liked back in high school. 3 months in Matt's house made me feel like I had aged 10 years, but I finally stepped out into the light. I doubted I would ever see either of them again. At some point in September, Matt put up some website on some weird MP3 loop with him and a bunch of other people screaming, "I am Jessie Mack, Jessie fucking Mack." Just that over and over again. Someone told me that Matt was signing word check as Jessie Mack now. None of his old friends really hanging out with him anymore, so it's hard to verify anything I hear about him these days. Next time I saw Nate was in mid-October. He'd apparently come back to New Jersey and try to find a reason with Matt. Tell him to shut down the webpage. The webpage itself has gathered over 50,000 hits, which was all right, count for the shitty music in the world. Matt was also selling Jessie Mack clothing, which is selling more like rapid fire since I'd ever seen it. Nate only stayed for 3 days, and I was at work for the first 2. When I finally saw him, he was standing outside of Matt's driveway in pouring rain, looking about as bad off as when I left him last night. After about 20 minutes of trying to reason with him, we went inside. I didn't even recognize the place. In the foyer, 2 in the wall were bashed in. It was always a dirty apartment, but now it looked like no one had been there in years. All over the house, walls were punched in, Any space that still had a wall had written on it. Most of the writings was in Gallic, so I don't know what the fuck it said. But there were several references to Jessie Mack in one of the ancient Gallic entity. An English translation of the name was the descendant of the Dark One. Nate nodded solemnly, as if he'd known this all along. There was an odd couple shouting heroin on the couches. The woman looked up at her boyfriend, saying, "I want to get closer. You don't even understand. I want to get closer to Jessie Mack." The man looked up at us. "I'll be home in a few hours. He's going to play guitar and put on a show for us." He gestured towards the guitar in the corner, with the broken neck. 3 working strings, and the word Jessie Mack crudely carved across the bottom panel. Nate ran out of the house screaming. According to him in the alleyway, rain streamed down his face, but nonetheless, I could tell he was sobbing. "You're not even fucking real," he shouted at me. "You live in my head. None of this is real. It's all just a fucking joke." I tried to comfort him, but he wasn't taking it. I know, I'm a fucking crazy person. That's what everyone says." We sat together for a few hours, and he calmed a bit, as did the rain. "I'm done," he finally said. I'm done with this. You have no idea how done I am with this, man. I'm going back. I'm gonna be a good person this time. I'm gonna be a vegan, just like the kid I used to know told me to. I'll go back to school. I'll do anything, just someone please make this fucking go away." He left the next morning. I never saw him again.